The golden light of dawn crept over the eastern mountains, painting the small village of Oakridge in a warm glow. Roosters crowed, announcing another day of labor and life in our humble community. I stepped out onto my porch, stretching my broad shoulders as the cool morning air filled my lungs. My name is Thorne. In Oakridge, that name carried weight quite literally. I was the village strongman, born with unusual physical power that set me apart from childhood. By 16, I could lift what 3 grown men struggled with. By 20, my reputation had spread beyond our valley. Thorne. The logs for the mill. My father's voice called from the path. Even at 60, he worked tirelessly as the village's master carpenter, though age had bent his once straight back. "Coming, father," I replied, my deep voice carrying across our yard. Our village survived on timber and craftsmanship. The massive old growth trees that surrounded Oakridge provided our livelihood, but handling them required immense strength. That's where I came in. What took teams of men with ropes and oxen, I could manage alone. "No man in the valley has your gift, son," my father often said. "Your strength is a blessing, but blessings can become burdens when they separate you from others." In Oakridge, my strength had become my identity and my isolation. As I made my way toward the mill, villagers nodded respectfully, keeping a careful distance. Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts, whispering about the giant. Even my childhood friends had grown distant, unable to relate to someone who could uproot a small tree with his bare hands. The women of the village were perhaps the most complicated part of my existence. They admired my physique from afar but feared my power up close. 3 courtships had ended the same way, with nervous laughter and eventual withdrawal. "Your manhood is too much," the village matchmaker had said after my 3rd failure. "Not your well, you understand. Your strength, your intensity. It overwhelms them." What good was strength that pushed away those you wished to hold close? At the mill, I easily hoisted logs that would normally require 4 men. The workers nodded appreciatively but kept their distance. I was a tool, a resource, not quite one of them. Thorne called Miller Jenkins, interrupting my brooding. "We've got word from Westham. They need help. That bridge of theirs collapsed again in the spring floods." I nodded, knowing what this meant. Another journey, another display of strength, another chance to be marveled at rather than known. Little did I know that this particular journey would change everything. For in Westham, beside bees. Someone awaited who would see beyond my muscles to the man inside, someone who would teach me that true strength had nothing to do with what I could lift. The journey to Westham normally took 2 days on foot, but I made it in 1. My long strides ate up the miles as I carried tools and supplies that would have required a cart for anyone else. The familiar weight on my shoulders was almost comforting. Physical burdens were the ones I understood best. The forest path wound through ancient trees, their massive trunks reminding me of my own place in the world. Powerful, yes, but temporary in the grand scheme of things. These giants had stood for centuries and would remain long after I was gone. What legacy would I leave beyond tales of feats of strength? By dusk, the lights of Westham appeared through the trees. Unlike our woodland Oakridge, Westham sat beside the wide river Keld, its buildings crafted of river stone and mortar. The collapsed bridge was immediately visible, a crumpled ruin of wood and stone halfway across the rushing water. And the strong man from Oakridge called a voice as I approached the village centre. Heads turned and a small crowd gathered. I was used to this reception. An older man pushed through the crowd, Mayor Tillman, whom I'd met on previous visits. "Thorne, we feared you wouldn't arrive until tomorrow, but the river rises with each rainfall." I set down my load of tools. I came as quickly as I could, and carrying enough for 10 men, as usual, Tillman said with an appreciative whistle. "We've prepared the river house for you. Tomorrow at first light, we'll assess the damage." The crowd dispersed, and a young boy was assigned to lead me to my lodging. As we walked, he barraged me with questions. "Is it true you wrestled a bear once? Can you really bend iron with your hands? My PA says you pulled a wagon out of mud so deep it had swallowed the wheels." I smiled tiredly. Some tales grow in the telling, lad. But you are the strongest man in all the valley, aren't you? Was I? And if so, what did it matter? Strength comes in many forms, I said finally, surprising myself with the response. The river house was comfortable enough, a small stone building used for housing travelers and occasional dignitaries. After a simple meal brought by the innkeeper's wife, who seemed nervous to linger in my presence, I sat alone by the fire, listening to the rush of the river beyond the walls. Tomorrow would bring hard work, diving into cold waters to inspect the bridge foundations, lifting stone and timber, directing men who would look to me for both leadership and labor. It was a familiar role, one that would earn me more tales and respect, but not the connection I secretly craved. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. "Enter," I called, expecting the innkeeper with more firewood, or perhaps the mayor with additional details about tomorrow's work. Instead, a woman stepped through the doorway. She was neither young nor old, neither beautiful by conventional standards nor plain. Of average height and build, she carried herself with unusual confidence, meeting my eyes directly, something few in my presence did. "I'm Ella," she said simply. "The village healer. Mayor Tillman thought I should check on you after your journey." "I'm not injured," I replied, somewhat confused. She smiled. "Not all wounds are visible, Thorne of Oakridge." Something in her direct gaze made me uncomfortable. Most people looked at my arms, my chest, my obvious physical power. She seemed to be looking at something else entirely. "I don't require healing," I said more gruffly than intended. "Don't you?" She set down a small basket on the table. "These are herbs for sleeping. The river can be loud for those not used to it." As she arranged the small packets, I noticed her hands strong and capable, with calloused fingertips and a small burn scar across one knuckle. Working hands. Healing hands. "You've helped rebuild the bridge before," she said. Not a question, but a statement. 3 times in 7 years, I confirmed. "And why do you come? Surely Oakridge needs its strong man too." The question caught me off guard. No one asked why I did what I did. They simply expected it. "It's what I can offer," I said finally. "My strength." "Isham." She finished arranging her herbs and moved toward the door. "Perhaps tomorrow you'll discover that's not all you have to give, Thorne of Oakridge." With that cryptic statement, she left, leaving behind the scent of dried herbs and a strange feeling that the ground beneath my feet had somehow shifted. Dawn broke with the sound of hammering and men's voices calling to one another. I rose, stretched my massive frame, and prepared for the day's labor. The herbs Ella had left remained untouched. I'd slept surprisingly well, despite the river's constant voice. At the bridge site, a team of 20 men had already gathered. They fell silent as I approached, stepping back to let me pass. Mayor Tillman hurried forward. "The situation is worse than we feared," he explained, pointing to the collapsed section. "The central pier has completely given way. Someone will need to dive down to assess the foundation." I nodded, already removing my shirt. The men murmured the water was spring-fed, numbingly cold even in summer. "The current is strong," warned one of the older workers. "It's pulled down stronger swimmers than most." "I'm not most," I replied simply. The cold hit, like a physical blow, as I dove into the churning river. The weight of the water pressed against me, but I fought through it, diving deep to where the bridge foundation should have been. Visibility was poor, but my hands found what my eyes couldn't see. The stone foundation had shifted, undermined by years of current. When I surfaced, gasping for air, the men pulled me to shore. As I explained what I'd found, a familiar figure approached from the village Ella, carrying a blanket. "It's foolish to stay wet in this breeze," she said matter-of-factly, handing me the blanket. Again, her eyes met mine without the usual awe or fear. It was refreshing. "The foundation stones have shifted," I told the gathering crowd, "but they'll need to be reset before we can rebuild the span." "But that's impossible," Mayor Tillman protested. "And those stones weigh tons. We'd need a team of oxen, and even then, working underwater." "I'll do it," I said simply. "Bisker Sexand, Did you? Wait. A murmur ran through the crowd. Even for me, this would be a tremendous feat. The stones would need to be lifted from the river and repositioned precisely, all while fighting the current. You'll kill yourself, Ella said quietly, not challenging but stating what she saw as fact. I looked at her, surprised by her bluntness. Do you have a better solution? Not alone, she replied. No one should bear such a burden alone. For some reason I felt she wasn't just talking about the bridge. The work began. Using ropes and levers, I descended into the frigid water again and again, feeling for the massive foundation stones, securing lines to them so the men above could help guide them, though the actual lifting fell to me. Each stone was a battle against water, weight, and my own burning lungs. By midday, I had reset 2 of the 5 stones. My muscles screamed with effort, and despite the cold water, sweat mixed with river on my face. Coming up for air after the second stone, I found not the mare but Ella waiting at the river's edge. Drink, she ordered, holding out a steaming cup. It will warm you from within. The liquid was bitter but spread heat through my chilled body. As I drank, she studied me with that same direct gaze. You push yourself too hard, she observed. Reserved. It's what they expect, I replied without thinking. And what do you expect, Thorne of Oakridge? What do you want beyond being needed for your strength? The question hung between us, unanswered, as Mayor Tillman approached with news that the 3rd stone was ready for placing. Back into the cold embrace of the river I went, fighting now not just the current but my own fatigue. The 3rd stone nearly defeated me as I struggled to position it. The current shifted unexpectedly, pinning my leg between stones. Pain shot through me, sharp and immediate. I fought panic, aware that my air was running out. With one desperate surge of strength, I shifted the stone and freed myself, then kicked for the surface, lungs burning. Hands pulled me from the water, but I was barely conscious of them. The world spun, darkened, then returned with Ella's face hovering over mine. Breathe, she commanded, and somehow my body obeyed. I tried to sit up, to return to work, but sharp pain in my leg stopped me. The bridge, I began. Well, wait, she interrupted firmly. You've done enough for today. These protests rose from the mayor and villagers. The river was rising, the work urgent. But Ella stood her ground. Would you work a horse until it dropped dead? She challenged. This man has limits, though he pretends otherwise. The stones can wait until morning. To my surprise, it was a young village man who spoke up in support. She's right. We ask too much of one man, strong as he is. Perhaps together we can find another way. Ella smiled at the young man, then turned back to me. Can you walk? Pride made me nod, though when I stood, the pain nearly took me back to the ground. Without comment, Ella slipped under my arm, her shoulder supporting some of my weight. Despite her average build, she stood firm, accepting my bulk without complaint. I'm too heavy for you, I protested. She gave me a sidelong glance. Strength isn't just in muscles, Thorne of Oakridge. Sometimes it's in knowing when to accept help. As we made our slow way back to the river house, I found myself aware of how rarely anyone touched me voluntarily. Her shoulder under my arm, her body against my side. It had been years since I'd experienced such casual, necessary contact. At the river house, she examined my injured leg. The gash was deep but clean. As she worked, applying salves and bandages, her touch was firm but gentle. Why aren't you afraid of me? I asked suddenly. Her hands paused their work. Should I be? Most are. My strength is just one part of you, she finished. I see a man who carries burdens beyond the physical ones. A man who has accepted a role without questioning if it's truly his. Her words struck me silent. When had anyone last seen me as more than my capability? Rest, she said, rising to leave. Tomorrow, we'll try a different approach to your bridge. Our bridge, I corrected without thinking. Her smile was the last thing I saw before exhaustion claimed morning brought pain, but also clarity. As I tested my injured leg, Finding it stiff but functional, I realized something had shifted inside me as well. For the first time in years, I questioned whether brute strength alone was my only value. A knock at the door revealed not Ella, as I'd half hoped, but a group of young men from the village. "Healer Ella sent us," explained their leader, a stocky fellow named Gareth. "She said you'd need help reaching the bridge site." I started to protest that I could manage, then remembered her words. Sometimes strength is in knowing when to accept help. "Thank you," I said instead, and saw their surprise at my acceptance. At the bridge site, an unexpected scene greeted me. Villagers had gathered in large numbers, not just to watch but organized into teams. Ropes, pulleys, and wooden frameworks had been assembled overnight, and directing it all was Ella. She approached as I arrived, supported between two of the young men. "You should be resting that leg," she chided, but her eyes showed approval that I'd accepted assistance. "What is all this?" I asked, gesturing to the activity. "A different kind of strength," she replied. "While you slept, we planned. The remaining stones are too heavy for any one person, even you. But with enough hands, enough minds working together." I looked again at the system. They'd devised a clever arrangement of counterweights and mechanical advantage that might indeed move the massive stones without relying solely on brute force. "It might work," I admitted. "It will work," she corrected, "because it must, and because we'll do it together." The day unfolded unlike any work I'd experienced before. Instead of stepping aside for the strong man to handle the impossible task, the villagers stepped forward, each contributing what they could. Young men dove in teams to secure the ropes. Older men with experience in stonecraft directed the precise positioning. Women organized food, dry clothes for the swimmers, and tended to minor injuries. And I found myself in an unfamiliar role, not the lone hero, but one contributor among many. My strength was still valuable, but now it was part of a greater whole. When we needed power, I provided it. When we needed precision or knowledge I lacked, others stepped forward. By midday, the fourth stone was in place, positioned more accurately than I could have managed alone. By dusk, all 5 foundation stones stood firm, and the framework for the new span was taking shape above them. As workers began dispersing for the night, exhausted but proud, Ella found me sitting on a riverside boulder, watching the sunset paint the water gold. "How does it feel?" she asked, settling beside me. "Strange," I admitted. "All my life, I've defined myself by what I alone could accomplish. Today I did less physical labor than usual, yet more was achieved." "And the village sees you differently now," she observed. It was true. Throughout the day, the nervous deference had given way to something warmer, respect certainly, but mingled with camaraderie. I'd been invited to share meals, asked for opinions beyond matters of strength, included in jokes. "Why did you do this?" I asked her. "Challenge how they used me." "How I used myself." Her eyes met mine with that now familiar directness. "Because I recognized the loneliness of being seen for only one aspect of yourself. As a healer, people see me only in moments of need, defined by one skill. We are both more than our usefulness, Thorne." The simplicity of her understanding struck me deeply. All my enormous strength had never allowed me to move what she had moved in just one day, the fixed perception of who I was and what I could be. "Thank you," I said, the words inadequate for the gift she'd given. She smiled. "The bridge will be finished tomorrow. Will you return immediately to Oakridge?" The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Would I return unchanged to the role I'd always played? Or would I carry this new understanding with me? "I think," I said slowly, "Oakridge might benefit from what Westham has taught me. The bridge was completed by midday of the third day, a stronger structure than any previous version, built not by one man's might, but by a community's collective effort. As we celebrated its completion, I found myself at the center of a different kind of attention than I was accustomed to. Children no longer hid, but asked questions about how the pulleys worked. Men clapped me on the shoulder without hesitation. Women spoke to me directly, not through intermediaries. and Ella watched it all with quiet satisfaction. When the time came to depart, the entire village gathered to bid me farewell. Mayor Tillman pressed a payment pouch into my hands. "Less than we usually pay you," he admitted, "since you insisted on doing less of the work yourself. But perhaps what you taught us about working together is worth more than what we'd have paid for your strength alone." I looked at the gathered faces, people who had worked alongside me rather than standing back in awe or fear. "The lesson was mine as well," I told him. "Consider the debt paid in full." My gaze found Ella at the edge of the crowd. She stepped forward. "Will Oakridge welcome this new approach?" she asked quietly. "They may need convincing," I admitted. "Change doesn't come easily." Perhaps she hesitated. "Perhaps they might benefit from a healer's perspective as well. Westham has 2 other healers who could manage without me for a time." But my heart quickened. "You would come to Oakridge to help translate what you've learned here," she said, "and perhaps to learn something new myself." The journey back to Oakridge took longer than my solitary journey to Westham had. We travelled at a more reasonable pace, and the time allowed for conversation that deepened my understanding of this remarkable woman. Ella had been orphaned young, raised by the previous village healer. Like me, her skill had set her apart, called upon in crisis, but held at a careful distance otherwise. "People fear reminders of their fragility," she explained as we rested beside a forest stream. "Your strength reminds them of their weakness. My healing reminds them of their mortality. Yet you don't let it isolate you as I did," I observed. "I fought against it," she corrected. "Built connections wherever possible. Insisted on being seen as more than my skill." Her eyes held mine. "As you must now do." Oakridge received us with surprise, their strong man returning with a companion, and a woman at that. Whispers followed us through the village to my father's home. The old carpenter studied Ella with curious eyes before welcoming her warmly. That night, over a simple meal, I explained what had happened in Westham, not just the bridge rebuilding, but the rebuilding of my understanding of my place in the world. "I've watched you grow apart from the village, even as your strength grew," my father said thoughtfully. "Perhaps I should have spoken sooner." "The time wasn't right," Ella suggested. "Sometimes we must discover our own limitations before we can grow beyond them." The following days brought the changes I had hoped for but could never have achieved alone. Ella moved through the village with her direct, unassuming manner, speaking to the women as I began working differently with the men. When logs needed moving at the mill, I organized teams rather than shouldering the burden alone. When the smithy needed a large anvil relocated, I taught him to use levers rather than waiting for my strength. Resistance came, as expected. Why make work for 10 men when Thorne could do it himself? Some complained. "He's getting soft," others whispered. But as projects were completed more efficiently, with more hands involved and more minds contributing, the whispers changed. "Never seen the mill production so high," I overheard at the tavern. "The new irrigation channel works better than the old one ever did," a farmer admitted. Most importantly, the walls of isolation began to crumble. Working alongside others rather than for them created connections that had been impossible before. Shared labor led to shared meals, shared stories, shared lives. And through it all, Ella was there, sometimes beside me, sometimes working separately among the village women, but always returning to share observations and encouragement. Her initial visit of a few weeks stretched into months. On midsummer evening, as the village celebrated the most bountiful early harvest in memory, we sat together on a hillside overlooking the festivities. "You've changed this place," she said, watching children play games that now included mock versions of the pulley systems I'd introduced. "We've changed it," I corrected. "I had the strength, but you showed me how to use it differently." "And found a place where your strength could be matched," she added with a smile. I looked at her then, this woman of average height and build who carried a different kind of strength. One that had, indeed, handled my manhood, the burden and blessing of who I was when no one else could. "Will you stay?" I asked simply. Her eyes met mine with that familiar directness. "In Oakridge?" "With me," I clarified. Her hand found mine, strong fingers interlacing with my much larger ones. But some burdens are better carried together, she said. Below us, the village continued its celebration, now a community in more than just name. My strength remained, but it had found its proper place not as a substitute for connection, but as one thread in a stronger fabric. No woman in the village could handle what I had been isolated, burdened by expectations, defined by a single trait. But Ella hadn't handled that man, she had transformed him. And in doing so, had transformed a village. 5 years have passed since Ella came to Oakridge. The village has prospered, not just economically but in spirit. The systems we introduced have spread to neighboring communities, carried by traders and travelers impressed by what they witnessed here. My father smiles more these days. His workshop has expanded, now training young apprentices in techniques that spare their bodies the toll his took. But he holds his grandchild with hands that pain him less, thanks to Ella's treatments and the reduced burden of heavy lifting. Yes, we have a child now, a daughter with her mother's direct gaze and, some say, hints of her father's strength. But whatever gifts she develops, she will grow up in a community that values contribution over capability, connection over singular talent. Ella continues her healing work, though she has trained 2 apprentices of her own. Together, we have built something neither of us could have created alone, a home where strength and healing complement rather than define us. I still lift heavy things when needed. Some tasks simply require raw power. But now I do so as just one skill among many that I offer my community. The isolation that once defined me has been replaced by belonging. Yesterday, a traveler passed through Oakridge, a massive man with shoulders that strained his shirt seams and a lonely look I recognized all too well. I saw him watching as I organized a barn raising, directing rather than dominating the work. Before he left, I spoke with him, shared what I had learned from a healer who saw beyond my strength to the man beneath. Perhaps he too will find his way to a different understanding of his gifts. As for me, I've discovered that greatest strength isn't in what you can carry alone, but in knowing when to set down your burdens and allow others to help shoulder them. In vulnerability, there is a different kind of power. And in the eyes of the woman who taught me this truth, I find a reflection of who I truly am, not just Thorne the strongman, but Thorne the man, husband, father, teacher, friend. No woman in the village could handle the lonely burden I carried, until one showed me I never needed to carry it alone.